Welcome to Crash Course. Today we are here to talk about the issue of foreign policy and American government. The definition of foreign policy is a government strategy in dealing with other nations whereby the main goal is to provide security, create prosperity, and make the world a better place. One of America's founding fathers, George Washington, was a big encourager of the policy of isolationism, which means we don't deal with issues of other nations across the Atlantic. However, this policy was broken by World War I in the early 1900s when the U.S. was dragged into a world conflict. However, the U.S. returned to isolationism in the 1930s during the Great Depression. This did not last long, however, as the U.S. was soon pulled into World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Time for our open letter. From George Washington. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations that have as little political connection as possible, while by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. This quote by our founding father emphasizes his belief that the U.S. should abstain from interfering with foreign nations and stick to an isolationist policy. Miracle. The first topic we will explore in the issue of foreign policy is the military and security. U.S. intelligence agencies spend about $55 billion a year. That's a lot of money. The National Security Council was formed in 1947 by Congress. It includes the President, Vice President, Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of State. Its main purpose is to coordinate U.S. foreign and defense policies.
The CIA
was also created after World War II. It was designed to keep an eye on other nations and has been involved in many controversial reform efforts over the years. These reform efforts include giving aid to help overthrow the overthrow of non-democratic leaders in foreign nations. Defense spending has been a big political issue, as Republicans tend to want to spend more on military, while the Democrats want to spend less. Military spending increased during the Cold War under the Nixon administration. However, tensions cooled down in the 80s and 90s, which led to a decrease in military spending. However, this did not last long, as 9/11 soon happened, and U.S. troops were deployed overseas to the Middle East, skyrocketing military spending. Overall, the military has 1.4 million members. Most costly thing to this is deployment. In recent years, there's been close to 300,000 troops in the Middle East. Terrorism is at the top of foreign policy agenda, with groups like ISIS growing. The U.S. typically uses military force to defeat terrorists. This is evidence from the Iraqi war from 2003 to 2011 against Al-Qaeda, and the war in the Middle East right now against ISIS. Although military is usually used with terrorism, diplomacy is another method that the U.S. uses. Diplomacy is the profession, activity, or skill of managing a country's international relations, typically by a country's representatives abroad. Diplomacy is a quiet method of influence in foreign policy, typically involves a summit with ambassadors or representatives to work out agreements. Diplomacy is not as captivating as more violent methods of engagement, but it usually involves stakes that are just as high as perhaps a war in regards to the relationship between the U.S. and another country. Diplomacy may also link countries in a common effort to defeat an independently run organization such as ISIS. Prior to the conflict in the Middle East, the U.S. was highly involved in the affairs of other nations and their policies. Starting in the early 1990s, the U.S. started to use military force in conjunction with diplomacy to accomplish humanitarian ends.
Examples of humanitarian policies are restoring the elected leader of Haiti in 1994 and stopping the ethnic warfare in Bosnia by bombing the Serbs in 1995. In recent years, this has included assisting the nation of Haiti after the devastating earthquake rocked the nation in 2010. Many of these issues that the U.S. intervenes in foreign countries are highly controversial, as it involves violating a nation's sovereignty with force, and American lives could be lost. However, these demands for humanitarian intervention continue to rise, and forcing a global leader for good America to lend a hand in these issues. Let's talk about the money side of foreign policy. Economic policies are government actions that negatively affect other economies as an attempt to make them change a policy. This includes the U.S. government's embargo on Cuba in 1958 as an attempt to end their communistic ways. These policies can be less risky and more effective than a full-scale war because all countries rely on their economies to remain stable.
Trade regulations, tariff policies, monetary policies, and economic sanctions are all economic instruments of foreign policy. The most used and arguably the most effective is economic sanctions. Sanctions are the ending of trading or economic relations with a specific country. They are used to try to alter the strategic decisions of state and non-state actors that threaten their interests or violate international norms of behavior. That's all on foreign policy we got for you today. Thanks for watching, folks.
No, Jake. No, already bad.
Devon, stop talking.
Now it's time for our open letter.
You got a hand?
Welcome to Crash Course. We're just doing the opening. It was military and security, so
Why don't we do that?
now it's time for the open letter. Yo, this quote is from one of our greatest founding fathers ever, George Washington.
Oh yeah, boys.
Rule of conduct for us in regard to. However, even though diplomacy.
Hey, just keep going. We can edit this. We can edit this. Keep going.
Did you stop it?
Yeah, I did. Oh my. It's still going? I bet I knew. Well, that's a blooper. Alright.